Have you ever considered that the very blueprint of who you are, the hidden architecture of your mind, was largely sketched out by experiences long before you could even form words? It's a pretty profound thought, isn't it? Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're plunging into a really pivotal chapter from Stephen A. Mitchell and Margaret J. Black's Freud and Beyond, a history of modern psychoanalytic thought. Our mission really is to explore ego psychology, a movement that shifted psychoanalytic focus. It moved away from Freud's intense excavation of the unconscious, the id secrets, towards the ego's more ordinary yet profoundly important functions. And crucially, how our environment shapes us right from birth. We'll unpack the key ideas, define some of the complex terms, and try to bring case examples to life so you can clearly understand this essential evolution in psychoanalysis.
Yeah, it's a really crucial shift in perspective. Freud, in his early work, he really saw himself as an archaeologist of the mind, a discoverer of a previously unknown world, the unconscious. He was totally intent on unearthing those crucial, often forbidden, infantile wishes and fears, like Schliemann digging for ancient exotic relics. He definitely noticed the more commonplace aspects of mental life, sure, but his passion kept pulling him back to the deeper, more primitive stuff. He was really after the secrets.
So if Freud was so focused on these secrets, these sort of deeper recesses, was he maybe missing something right there in front of him? What made his followers shift their gaze to these more commonplace finds he'd sort of sidelined?
That's exactly it. Those ordinary features of mental life that Freud had identified but, set aside, they started to deeply intrigue some of his closest colleagues. His initial digging had opened up these dramatic views of the psyche's inner structure, and it really sparked an explosion of investigations. This tradition, what we now call ego psychology, it really got going in the 1930s in Vienna, then kind of dispersed because of the war, and eventually took really firm root in America.
Right, and Freud himself used the term ego pretty loosely before 1923, didn't he? Just for the dominant, mostly conscious ideas. But after 1923, with the ego and the id, well, the ego became one of three fundamental psychic agencies. Alongside the id and superego, what did that structural shift really mean for how the ego was understood?
Oh, it was huge. The ego's main jobs now were basically to represent reality and, through its defenses, to channel and control the internal drive pressures coming from the id. And at the same time, navigating the demands of the superego and the outside world. It's a tough balancing act. So this new model, it naturally led ego psychologists to ask critical new questions like, are there developmental phases to the ego's defensive tasks?
Okay.
And is this progression just predetermined, or do environmental factors, influence it? How do caregivers affect ego development and superego consolidation? And fundamentally, what role do our basic drives, libidinal and aggressive, play in forming the ego's earliest capacities?
Wow, yeah. Those questions really broadened psychoanalysis, didn't they? Invigorating our understanding of both, like normal functioning and psychopathology. What's fascinating, though, is that unlike other schools popping up around then, ego psychology carefully preserved Freud's original drive theory. They built on it rather than just tossing it out.
Exactly. That's key. Neurosis, in this expanded view, wasn't just about forbidden wishes anymore. It was seen as a complex compromise between the id's desires, the superego's prohibitions, and the ego's attempt to mediate it all, often by, disguising the id's impulses to make them socially acceptable.
And this brings us right to Anna Freud, Sigmund Freud's daughter and a real pioneer in child analysis. She made this pivotal insight. If all three agencies, id, ego, and superego, could function unconsciously, why would the unconscious ego and superego even want to reveal themselves in analysis? That sounds like a really practical problem for therapists.
It truly was, yeah. She realized that unconscious ego defenses are often egosyntonic, which means they feel perfectly acceptable to the patient. They're often central to their personality, their whole way of being. So exposing them isn't just about releasing impulses. It's like threatening a patient's entire way of life.
Yeah.
It's like trying to dismantle a carefully constructed house they've lived in comfortably for years.
That makes so much sense. So the key insight Anna Freud gave us is that defenses, like, say, reaction formation, where someone masks deep anger by being overly nice, almost suffocatingly helpful. Those aren't just psychological tricks. They're often these meticulously crafted solutions central to a person's identity, their place in the community. Undoing that means therapy isn't just fixing something. It's helping someone redefine who they are, which is well, profound and often really challenging.
Precisely. She argued that analysis was less a rescue mission and more like an attack against a culture, the patient's internal culture. The analyst had to move beyond just tracking id impulses and really actively discern the subtle workings of these defensive operations within what the patient was saying. The analyst, she said, must stand at a point equidistant from the id, the ego, and the superego. Try to be neutral. Her book, The Ego and Mechanisms of Defense from 1936, became this foundational text for clinicians, basically a handbook detailing all these unconscious strategies.
Okay, so it sounds like a much more nuanced role for the analyst, looking at how we cope, not just what we're coping with. And this shift must have profoundly informed case studies, like Ernst Kris's reanalysis of that scientist who couldn't publish because he feared plagiarizing.
Right.
A traditional Freudian approach focused on the wish to plagiarize, seeing it as infantile aggression. It helped a bit, but the problem didn't go away.
Exactly. Kris approached it differently. He focused on the ego's unconscious defensive operations, really undertaking an extended scrutiny of all the details, the surface stuff. And he made the startling discovery. The patient himself had actually introduced the ideas his friend later published without credit. He was essentially a ghostwriter.
Right.
The patient was using projection. He was attributing his own intellectual substance to his friend, building him up into this admirable figure while unconsciously sabotaging himself. Kris's success came directly from this exploration of the surface, studying the details of behavior, which was a direct application of Anna Freud's insights into defenses, not just digging for the id.
So Anna Freud really established the ego as an object of study in its own right. She expanded psychoanalysis to look at character style, even normal personality functioning. And this paved the way for Heinz Hartmann, often called the father of ego psychology. He was also intrigued by those unexamined psychic artifacts Freud unearthed, but he moved beyond just conflict, right? He started thinking about the broader technological implications of these psychic structures, like how do these mental tools actually function in everyday life?
Yes, he shifted the focus away from just psychopathology and towards general human development and adaptation. How do we fit into our world?
Right.
But what's crucial, again, is that Hartmann was really careful to develop his innovations as extensions of Freud's vision, preserving Freud's drive theory, unlike some others. His book, Psychology and the Problem of Adaptation from 1937, though quite abstract and non-clinical, provided this vital conceptual framework for understanding the structural dimensions of the psyche itself, how it's built.
And this directly challenged Freud's developmental model, didn't it? Freud saw the baby as fundamentally self-absorbed, driven by internal tensions, only forced into reality by, well, the brick wall of reality, frustration. That frustration was supposed to lead to higher-order thinking. His famous line, where id was, there ego shall be.
Right. Hartmann had a different take. He was influenced by Darwin, actually. He reasoned that humans are intrinsically designed to fit their environment, psychologically as well as physically. We're meant to adapt. He envisioned a baby born with built-in ego potentials, which he called conflict-free ego capacities, things like language, perception, thinking, and these unfold naturally in what he called an average expectable environment. They emerge not primarily from conflict, but as intrinsic birthrights, part of our design.
It's a huge difference, a really different starting point. And he introduced the concepts of autonomy. Primary autonomy refers to these innate conflict-free tools, like speech. But then there's secondary autonomy. How does that work?
So, secondary autonomy is interesting. It describes how defenses, things originally born in conflict, can actually evolve into adaptive capacities and become autonomous, independent. For example, intellectualization. It might start as a defense against painful feelings, right? But it can mature into a genuine, useful capacity for abstract thinking.
Okay.
The key is that these functions, even if they started defensively, become independent and useful in their own right, separate from the original conflict.
But hang on, this creates an interesting energy problem then. If these conflict-free ego functions are autonomous, where do they get their energy? If all mental energy comes from sexual and aggressive drives, according to Freud, Freud's solution was sublimation, right? Channeling drive energy into acceptable things. But it still kind of retained its drive qualities.
Yeah, exactly. Hartmann's big innovation here was neutralization. He proposed that the ego essentially, quote, strips the drives of their sexual and aggressive qualities. It transforms that raw instinctual energy into something like clean, usable electrical energy for everyday mental functions. He compared it to a hydroelectric plant, transforming a raging river into power.
Okay, so the ego takes that primal force, cleans it up, and repurposes it for constructive tasks like thinking, perceiving, learning. That's a remarkable idea about where our focused mental energy actually comes from. And this naturally led to new questions about the environment itself, that average expectable environment, which brings us to Renee Spitz in developmental ego psychology.
Indeed. Hartman's ideas really begged for a deeper look into what that environment actually entailed. What are its specific elements? And Spitz delivered this, well, heartbreaking but absolutely seminal study in 1940 called Hospitalism. He observed infants in a foundling home. Their physical needs were met: food, shelter, but they were deprived of nurturing interaction, human connection. And these infants became depressed, withdrawn, sickly. They showed severe developmental delays in motor skills,
Oh,
coordination.
it's terrible.
It was devastating. A third of them died by age 2, and many survivors by age 4 couldn't sit, stand, walk, or talk properly.
So Spitz's study just dramatically showed that Freud's brick wall of reality,
Yeah.
the idea that frustration alone forces development,
Yeah.
is actually deadly in the absence of a loving caregiver's touch. You need more than just frustration.
Absolutely. It forced a complete rethinking of the libidinal object. Remember, Freud initially saw a libidinal object very mechanically, just a target for drive discharge, like a shoe for a fetishist. The mother, in that early view, was important only for providing gratification. Identification was just the second best solution if you lost that gratification.
Right.
But Spitz, while keeping Freud's pleasure-seeking libido, added that our ego capacities allow for caring and a deeply gratifying personal connection. He argued that a libidinal object isn't just a target, it's a developmental achievement. It's a selective personal attachment you hold on to even when they're absent. And it's fundamentally important in its own right, providing essential human connectedness.
Wow. And his work also introduced this idea of psychological fusion after birth, didn't it? Conceptualizing the infant with mother as this core unit. The mother acts as the baby's auxiliary ego, mediating all that chaotic stimuli, regulating experience until the baby develops its own capacities. It sounds like a really profound dialogue.
It is a really complex interaction through physical contact, body tension, posture, rhythm, tone. It creates this total sensing system between them. This dialogue, as he called it, transforms meaningless stimuli into meaningful signals. It lays the groundwork for the infant's emerging perception and memory traces, like that basic sequence. I was upset, then I felt better. Learning regulation.
And Spitz identified key organizers of the psyche,
Yeah.
these predictable behavioral shifts that marked critical developmental turning points. What were those?
Yes, the first organizer is the smiling response, usually around 3 months. It's the baby's first real social response, smiling at faces, mother, stranger, even a mask showing a clear preference for the human face. The second organizer is stranger anxiety, around 8 months. The infant now recognizes the mother's specific face and reacts with anxiety, maybe retreats from a stranger. This signals the capacity for a singular personal attachment. As Spitz put it brilliantly, there is no love until the loved one can be distinguished from all others.
That's powerful.
Isn't it? And the third organizer is the mastery of the no, around 15 months. The child learning to say and understand no. It's an external sign of an early identification with the prohibitory mother, showing enhanced psychic capacities like judgment and basic abstract thinking.
So Spitz really demonstrated how much early psychic development is mediated through that maternal environment, how the infant emerges from this psychological embeddedness and establishes a separate identity, which leads us, naturally, to Margaret Mahler.
Right. Mahler took Spitz's framework and extended it to address really severe disturbances, particularly childhood psychosis, which had largely been, well, outside the reach of traditional psychoanalysis. Freud had believed that in psychosis, libido withdrew inwards into a self-contained narcissistic state detached from external objects, which meant clinically there was nothing to transfer onto the person of the analyst.
Right, that was the thinking.
But Mahler challenged this. She argued psychosis wasn't necessarily libidinal withdrawal, but often a failure in the basic formation of the self, a profound confusion about who one is, what is self and what is other, a boundary problem.
She illustrated this with the case of Stanley, didn't she?
Mhm.
A 6-year-old psychotic boy who swung between listlessness and phonetic action, confusing images because of visual similarity.
Mm.
What was your take on Stanley's struggle?
Mahler believed Stanley wasn't detached from objects, but actually caught between powerful early needs for others and a sense of grave danger in having those needs met. It was a disturbance in the expectable and necessary boundary between himself and his object world. There were likely constitutional factors, like severe pain from an inguinal hernia he suffered, which was unmanageable for him, but also environmental factors. His mother was emotionally detached, preoccupied, unable to connect consistently. Her attempts to help, like force feeding when he was distressed, only added to his experience of unprocessable, distressing stimulation. He couldn't find a safe anchorage. So Stanley was trapped in this kind of symbiotic merger, swinging between personal formlessness, that listless state, and desperate attempts to establish a separate identity, like touching the therapist's arm to switch on agitated energy, creating a kind of boundary feeling against psychic dissolution.
That's such a vivid description, and this brings us to Mahler's central concept, separation individuation.
Exactly. She reformulated Freud's idea of primary narcissism. She argued children emerge from an initial autistic shell into a state of normal symbiosis, that earliest human connection. Then she outlined these key subphases, a complex interplay of maturation, psychological evolution, and maternal function. First is hatching. The infant shows increased alertness, looks outward more, checks back visually to the mother for orientation, culminates around 9 months. Then comes practicing. The toddler's new abilities, walking, moving, bring this sense of elation, almost omnipotence. Psychically, though, the child still feels at one with the mother, even while physically moving away.
Okay, that makes sense. The body moves away before the mind fully grasps the separation. And the final subphase sounds particularly crucial, almost precarious.
It absolutely is. A rapprochement, typically from 15 to 24 months. This is a crucial psychic disequilibrium. Psychological development catches up, bringing the often distressing awareness of psychic separateness. The toddler, who was fearless during the practicing phase, suddenly becomes tentative, clingy, needing mother in sight constantly to help regulate this new feeling of apartness.
And there are risks here.
Big risks. If the mother misreads this neediness as regression, maybe responds with impatience or unavailability, it can precipitate an anxious fear of abandonment and contribute later to an ongoing proclivity to depression. How this phase is navigated is really key.
Wow. Mahler's framework really helped clinicians understand and treat borderline patients, didn't it? Whose severe issues fell somewhere between neurosis and psychosis. She categorized these as pre-edible disturbances, rooted in this early mother-infant relationship. So what we're getting from Mahler, Spitz, and these other developmental ego psychologists is really a kind of new myth of origin for the human psyche.
That's a great way to put it. A myth where the baby emerges from a symbiotic union with the mother, whose care contains the fragile psyche, almost like the womb contained the fetus. And this vision provided a whole new lens for understanding so many features of human experience, from an artist's creative freedom, which Kris called regression in service of the ego, to the experience of symbiotic fusion in mature romantic love.
But these new developmental insights must have created some, well, tricky problems for existing Freudian theory, especially around the instinctual drives. Freud's ideas about the death instinct and primary erotogenic masochism, where aggression starts inwardly directed and pain feels sexually stimulating, those seem hard to square with this focus on early relationships shaping things.
Absolutely. This is where Edith Jacobson comes in, a truly courageous figure, a Berliner who escaped the Nazis. She offered a really powerful solution to integrate these perspectives. She proposed that biology and experience mutually influence each other. Drives, she argued, aren't fully formed at birth. They are biologically predetermined innate potentials, sure, but their distinctive features are acquired in the context of early relationships. They get shaped.
So it's not just purely inborn, it's shaped by our earliest interactions, nature and nurture working together. And she introduced the concept of affective perception, right?
Yes. The idea that experience is initially registered simply by how it feels good or bad, and our internal world gets organized around these distinctive poles of feeling. Predominantly satisfying experiences help consolidate a strong, healthy libido. Lots of frustrating experiences, on the other hand, can lead to a more powerful, potentially distorting aggressive drive. And importantly, she stressed, there's no such thing as objectively good mothering. It all depends on the fit, the temperamental match, the affective resonance between a specific mother and a specific baby.
And this is where the self and object images come in. Good experiences build images of a loving, giving mother and a happy, contented self.
Exactly. And frustrating experiences build images of a frustrating, unloving mother and an angry, frustrated self. Initially, in infancy, these good and bad images are kind of fused and confused.
Yeah.
Primitive. But by about 6 months or so, the infant starts being able to distinguish self from other more clearly. They begin forming more realistic depictions, like mom is both gratifying and sometimes frustrating. This integration of good and bad images is absolutely crucial for healthy development. It allows us to tolerate conflictual feeling states, it tones down those raw, primitive drives, and it replaces intense all-or-nothing love-hate with more nuanced, varied, and subtle feeling states. It's what lets us, as adults, be disappointed in someone we still love.
Right, that capacity for ambivalence. And Jacobson's model directly challenged Freud's primary erotogenic masochism and death instinct, didn't it? Making them logical impossibilities, because drives start as unformed potentials, not initially self-directed, because there isn't a distinct self yet to direct them towards. She also saw superego development as a much longer process, shaped by internalized maternal constraints early on, not just popping up during the Oedipal conflict.
Exactly. And she also offered a revised view of the functional impact of libido and aggression. Libido, in her view, acts as a kind of psychic glue. It helps integrate those opposing images, good, bad self, good, bad other, and encourages pulling close connection. Aggression, conversely, energizes our awareness of differences. It promotes separation, helps form differentiated self and other images. It prompts pushing off. Both are absolutely indispensable, acting as counterbalances for developing a stable sense of identity. They function autonomously.
That framework makes a lot of intuitive sense, especially how aggression, in a way, can help us delineate ourselves, find our edges. But I imagine for some listeners, the idea of aggression being constructive might feel a bit, well, counterintuitive. Could you maybe elaborate on how this pushing off works without just becoming destructive?
Yeah.
Especially in contexts like merger fantasies.
That's a really crucial distinction, yeah. Merger fantasies, feeling at one with another person, can be highly gratifying. Think about intense intimacy for adults who have clear, stable ego boundaries. But for those with weaker boundaries, that feeling of merging can feel dangerous and deadly, like losing oneself. Constructive aggression, the kind born from manageable experiences of frustration and healthy limit setting early on, can actually balance this regressive pull of merger. It reminds the individual of their separateness and encourages that necessary pushing off. But, and this is key, this aggression must be manageable. It needs to have consolidated in an atmosphere where there was also sufficient gratifying libidinal experience, enough good feeling to contain it. It can't be purely destructive rage.
Okay, that clarifies it. It's about aggression serving separation, not just destruction. And all of this, naturally, has profound clinical applications. The focus shifted towards these pre-Oedipal disturbances, things that happened before language fully developed. So the analytic relationship itself became a much broader arena. Transference, the patient's patterns of relating to the analyst, wasn't just about uncovering forbidden Oedipal longings anymore. It became an opportunity to discern remnants of ill-fated attempts at building normal psychic structure, failures in those early developmental tasks.
Precisely. The analyst, by carefully attending to these patterns unfolding in the room, helps the patient develop a verbal story, an account of that early, often pre-verbal experience, and that understanding becomes the basis for repair. And they learn to distinguish different kinds of transference. Pre-Oedipal transferences, unlike the slower unfolding Oedipal ones, are often characterized by this almost kaleidoscopic presentation of images of self and other, dominated by intense emotional immediacy, rapid shifts, intense feelings.
This takes us back to Angela, the 23-year-old bank teller we heard about earlier. Her transference seems like a perfect illustration of this, her shifting expectations of the analyst, from screaming and attacking one moment to being cruelly berating the next.
Absolutely. Her rapidly shifting images clearly showed a failure in consolidation of positive and negative self and object images. She couldn't hold on to a consistent perspective of herself or the analyst, and her persistent experience of the analyst as just watching, sort of passively adrift, suggested this chronic sense of being anxiously adrift in an ambiguous, unresponsive environment, which likely reflected early maternal misattunement. It prevented a solid, reliable libidinal drive from forming. Even her nightmare, the hands pulling her into a wall, the terror of disappearing, it vividly visualized that nameless fear of losing herself, dissolving in intimate relationships.
And her aggression was incredibly intense, right?
Yes, Angela's raw, eruptive aggression, her terrifying belief that she could literally destroy the analyst with the hate in my eyes, that reflected her profound inability to integrate good and bad feelings. If she felt bad, everything was bad and potentially destructive. This is really what ego psychologists meant by functioning with defective equipment. If those fundamental psychological structures for managing closeness, separation, pleasure, regulating feelings, if they aren't properly in place due to early disruptions, how do you function? Even her symptom, the wall she felt, could be seen as her ego's desperate attempt to force a sense of psychic boundedness when natural separation felt impossible or terrifying.
And her sadomasochistic fantasies. where she imagined herself tied on a conveyor belt being tortured by this figure, Mega. From this perspective, they weren't just about Oedipal gratification disguised as pain.
No, not primarily. From an ego psychology viewpoint, these fantasies were seen as a makeshift yet creative structure, an attempt to satisfy deep needs for contact and even pleasure, while simultaneously expressing and containing her overwhelming aggression and fear of psychic dissolution. The pain, the conveyor belt holding her, the powerful mega figure, these elements all serve to maintain boundaries, provide a necessary counterforce against her intense negative feelings dissolving her. It mirrored, in a way, her mother's perceived forceful, aggressive ways of curbing and prohibiting.
That's a really powerful reframing of her internal world. So the analytic relationship itself became a chance for, well, developmental transformation. A second chance, almost.
Exactly. The analyst, in this view, becomes a kind of repairer, helping to fill unmet developmental needs. For Angela, exploring her passive provocativeness, you get me into it, revealed it as a longing for maternal interest, which helped her articulate those underlying fears like her thoughts could kill, or that closeness meant disappearing. Simply naming and clarifying feelings with the analyst led to increased self-definition and control over her emotional storms. The analyst functioned as a container for both positive and negative experiences, demonstrating crucially that the good could survive exposure to the bad. This helped Angela begin to balance her emotional life, to integrate. Even her stubbornness was eventually reframed as a positive wish to come up against the analyst, affirming her separate self.
So the whole metaphor for the analytic process itself really evolved, didn't it? From Freud's more adversarial images, war, chess, hunting wild beasts,
Right.
to something more like a partnership, maybe even a growth experience.
It absolutely did. Ego psychology introduced concepts like the working alliance, really appreciating the patient as a therapeutic ally, an invaluable scout in exploring their own conflicts. This partnership itself became therapeutic. Patients developed capacities for self-observation, reflectivity, delaying gratification, things linked to Hartman's idea of neutralization. There was also a deeper understanding of corrective reciprocity, the idea that psychic structure consolidates within a human partnership. Mahler explicitly saw treatment for children as a corrective symbiotic experience. Jacobson stressed the importance of emotional resonance for depressives, maintaining a continuous, subtle, emphatic tie with the analyst. So yes, the analytic process evolved from seeing it as a battle to seeing it as a partnership and a growth experience, where the analyst provides these necessary dyadic analytic provisions to help remedy faulty or missing early parental input.
Wow. What an incredible journey into the mind's intricate workings. We've really moved from Freud's initial sharp focus on the unconscious ed to a much broader, richer understanding of the ego's adaptive functions, normal development, and the absolutely profound impact of our earliest relationships.
Yeah, just to recap quickly, Anna Freud gave us the building blocks of defense theory. Hartman, the father of ego psychology, really opened the door to adaptation, conflict-free ego functions, neutralization. Renee Spitz showed us the crucial role of the libidinal object, the auxiliary ego, and those critical organizers of the psyche. Then Margaret Mahler illuminated the whole process of separation individuation, especially vital for understanding pre-ethical pathology. And Edith Jacobson courageously revised drive theory, showing how biology and experience interact to shape our fundamental self and object images.
This movement truly revolutionized psychoanalysis, didn't it? Leading to a much richer understanding of both psychopathology and, importantly, normal human experience. And it led to a profound transformation in clinical practice, viewing the analytic relationship itself as a potent source of growth and repair.
And maybe a final thought to leave you with. Consider the profound implication of this whole journey. That the very essence of who we are, our sense of self, our capacity for love, maybe even our artistic freedom, isn't just shaped by internal drives bubbling up from within. It's also exquisitely woven from those earliest, most intimate dances with our caregivers. This new myth of origin, as we called it, offers us a different lens. A lens to view not only our personal histories, but also the deepest aspects of our adult relationships. It invites you to ponder how those early dynamics might still be echoing in your life today, perhaps in moments of profound connection or even in moments of creative expression.
We really hope this deep dive into ego psychology has offered you a fresh perspective on the intricate workings of the human mind and the truly foundational role of early experiences. On behalf of the Last Minute Lecture team, thank you so much for joining us on this exploration.